Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer, because let's be real, if you have ever felt that absolute crushing societal pressure about where you live and how you pay for it, you're in the exact right place. We're going to unpack one of the most fiercely debated topics in all of personal finance, and we're doing it using cold, hard facts. You know the feeling, right? You're at a family gathering or a dinner party, and someone inevitably asks if you're still renting. There's this heavy, unspoken judgment, this intense cultural pressure that insists buying a house means you finally got your life together, while renting is somehow viewed as just a temporary waiting room. Well, today, we are going to look at the data that totally flips that script on its head.
So, the big question on everyone's mind, is buying a home always better than renting? I mean, we've all had that old saying drummed into our heads, haven't we? Renting is just throwing your money away. Man, that one little phrase has pushed countless people into making literally the largest financial decision of their lives way before they're actually ready. Why? Because they're terrified of failing some invisible societal test. But I want you to challenge that assumption right now. Is it actually a universal truth? Or is it just a financial myth dressed up as conventional wisdom? The emotional stakes here are sky high, for sure. But to find the real answer, we have to strip the emotion completely out of the equation.
And that brings us to this absolutely brilliant quote from our source material. Buying versus renting isn't a character test, it's a regional arithmetic problem. I love this. Take a second to really let that sink in. Actually, scratch that. Let's just appreciate how incredibly liberating that is. It strips away all that heavy emotional baggage, the guilt trips, and the societal expectations. Listen, whether you hand a check to a landlord or a mortgage lender every month says literally zero about your character, your maturity, or your success in life. Instead, it is purely a matter of logic. It's about geography and numbers. You don't need to consult your feelings here. You just need to consult a calculator. Now, what's really interesting about this is how we actually solve that arithmetic problem. You can do it using a toolkit that's probably sitting in your pocket right this very minute. We call it the 40-second math test. You don't need an advanced degree in finance, you don't need to hire a fancy wealth manager, and no way do you need to spend your weekend modeling complex spreadsheets. This is a ridiculously simple mathematical formula that takes under a minute to run, yet it holds the power to completely demystify your local housing market. It's fast, it's highly accessible, and honestly, it is the ultimate antidote to all that buy versus rent anxiety.
So, here is exactly how you execute this test. It's just 3 super straightforward steps. Ready? Step 1. Find the price of the home you'd want to buy, or just a typical home in your target neighborhood. Step 2. Figure out what it would cost to rent a similar home in that exact same neighborhood for 1 full year. Basically, just take the monthly rent and multiply it by 12. Step 3. Simply divide that home price by the annual rent you just calculated. That is literally it. Punch those 3 numbers into your phone, hit equals, and boom. In the time it takes to send a quick text message, you will have unlocked a massive piece of financial clarity. Okay, so what you've just calculated is known in the finance world as the price-to-rent ratio. Let's officially define this so you can lock this exact equation into your memory. It is simply the home price divided by 12 months of rent. That's the magic formula. This one single metric is basically the gold standard for evaluating real estate markets because it totally levels the playing field. Instead of, just guessing if a house is overpriced or feeling like rent is too high, this ratio gives you an objective mathematical baseline to evaluate any neighborhood in any city at any time. Let's move to a real-world example and see how this builds out. We're going to look at the rule of numbers by exploring 2 complete polar opposite geographical extremes, Cleveland, Ohio, and San Jose, California. Because remember what we said earlier, this is a regional arithmetic problem. That whole blanket statement of buying is always better completely falls apart the second you cross state lines, or honestly, sometimes even county lines. By looking at these 2 entirely different housing markets, we can see exactly how geography dictates the mouth. All right, here is your first absolutely crucial benchmark, the number 15. When you run your 40-second test, if your resulting ratio is under 15, buying is the clear, undisputed mathematical winner, period. Take a market like Cleveland. Home prices there are historically pretty low relative to what landlords are charging for rent. Because it takes less than 15 years worth of rent to equal the actual purchase price of the home, you can quickly outpace renting by locking in a mortgage and building that sweet equity. So if your calculator spits out a 10, a 12, or a 14, you should feel super confident calling up a real estate agent.
Now, on the flip side, okay, if you land between 16 and 24, you're in a bit of a gray zone where things like interest rates, your down payment, and how long you plan to stay really start to matter. But let's flip the script and look at the other extreme. If your price-to-rent ratio crosses the threshold and lands above 25, renting becomes the undeniable financial champion. Think about a market like San Jose. Home prices out there are incredibly high compared to annual rents. If you run the math and get a 30 or even a 35, it means buying that house comes at a massive premium. In this scenario, renting is definitely not throwing money away. It is mathematically the smartest, most protective financial move you could possibly make.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why one-size-fits-all advice is just so dangerous. In Cleveland, with a ratio reliably sitting under 15, the math practically begs you to buy. But over in San Jose, with a ratio soaring over 25, the math practically begs you to rent. Same exact formula, same 40-second test, but entirely different conclusions based entirely on the zip code. You see, the rule works flawlessly regardless of the geography because it relies on real, local data, not just outdated national stereotypes.
Just look at this. The chasm between Cleveland's market and San Jose's market is literally immense. This is exactly why taking real estate advice from your well-meaning uncle in Ohio when you live in California is an absolute recipe for disaster. Or, vice versa. The regional arithmetic is just too vastly different. When you truly understand the sheer mathematical gap between these two kinds of housing markets, the whole idea of feeling guilty for renting in a high-ratio city, it just seems completely absurd, doesn't it? So, the crucial point to take away from all this is your housing choice is a regional arithmetic problem. It is not a character test. Your decision needs to be completely divorced from societal pressure, from what your family expects, and from all those outdated financial myths. Listen to me. You are not a better person just because you buy a house, and you are definitely not a failure for renting one. You are simply someone who understands how to read the data of your specific local market, and you're making a rational, math-based decision for your own financial well-being. Which brings us to our final question for you today. What is the price-to-rent ratio in your zip code? I want to issue a little challenge for you right now as soon as this explainer ends. Take 40 seconds. Look up a house you'd love to live in your neighborhood. Look up the monthly rent for a similar house just down the street. Multiply that rent by 12 and divide the home price by that annual rent you just found. Are you living in a Cleveland or are you in a San Jose? Run the numbers for your own life, find out exactly what the math is telling you, and finally, just let go of all that pressure. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy calculating!